Welcome back to Killershrewfan Spooktacular Toy Reviews. Every kid had a boogeyman growing up. Something that scared them and made them afraid to look in their closets or under their bed for fear of what might be lurking in the dark. Of course, as we grow up, we lose these fears and look back on them with a weird sort of nostalgia as we realize how simple life was when we were afraid of these things that didn't really matter. Oddly enough, it would seem most of these fears stemmed from the most innocent of places, namely the movies we were allowed to watch because they were supposed to be quote-unquote safe for kids. Just off the top of my head, the boat sequence from Willy Wonka, Large Marge from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, the Devil in All Dogs Go to Heaven, the Gamork in A Never-Ending Story, Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective, and basically the entirety of Coraline. All of these are frightening examples from children's media, but with its devilish appearance and hyper-aggressive behavior, one of the characters that scared me as a kid was the Carnotaurus of Disney's Dinosaur. At the time, I had never seen anything like it, and between the horns, red hues, and frightening shots and sequences, it seemed as though I was watching the devil itself in dinosaur form. And believe it or not, there was some early concept artwork that made the creature look even more hellish. Of course, now that I'm grown, I'm not scared by it, and instead look back on the creature as one of my all-time favorite dinosaur designs in media, inaccuracies and all. So needless to say, when REBOR first teased that they would be creating a model based off this awesome character from my childhood, I was pretty excited. But through consistent delays and countless periods of radio silence on the project, we had to wait nearly 2 full years for the final product. All while being forced to consider the very real possibility that this Carnotaurus, like so many other of REBOR's announced models, had fallen to the wayside, never to be released. Well, our grueling wait finally came to an end this past summer when the Carnotaurus and its wavemate, the Acrixonatosaurus, finally hit retailers. I, of course, ordered it as soon as it was available, and now that I finally have it in hand, all I can say is, holy lord, was it worth the wait! This model is everything I have ever wanted, a massive, high-quality, statuesque recreation of the dinosaur that kickstarted my obsession with Carnotaurus. I wanted to review it right away, but after encountering my own series of delays, I figured now was the time, and given the frightening design and impact this thing had on my childhood, it seemed the perfect addition to Killershrewfan Spooktacular Toy Reviews. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it, starting as we always do with the packaging. REBOR seems to separate their dinosaurs into 2 categories, movie dinosaurs and scientific dinosaurs. With few exceptions, the scientific dinosaurs feature silhouettes and skeletal diagrams on their boxes, while the movie-inspired figures have images of the product itself against the usual black backdrop, which I think sells the product a little better. Here you can see the Carnotaur looking massive and fierce on the box, with the title of the figure adorning the left top corner while the REBOR logo sits on the lower right-hand side. The back of the box then features an image of Epitaph, the Acrixonatosaurus retool from the same mold. Now that I think about it, the name Epitaph has its own spooky connotations. He could have been his own review, but I don't even want to think about that at this point. So yeah, that's about all I can say about the box of the figure. Always love REBOR's packaging, but let's get to the dinosaur itself. And oh my gosh, I just cannot get enough of this figure. It looks incredible from every angle, wonderfully capturing the likeness of the film counterpart. I also feel I must immediately comment that it's an absolute unit, which adds so much to its overall presence, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back on track with a closer look. So starting on the head, the first thing that grabs me would be that beady golden eye staring out of that dark orbit right beneath the wonderfully weathered horns. Usually I don't care for REBOR's propensity for putting too much what I call eyeshadow on their figures, but here I think it works. It really frames that eye and makes it pop in a fiendish manner. As for the rest of the head, you can see that REBOR has covered the entire surface area with scales of varying sizes and styles. You've got more general scales covering most of the face, with rounded scales framing the orbits and temporal fenestra. You also have ridge scales on the nasals and larger, more rectangular scales on the lower jaw, with some larger three-dimensional scales breaking up the rest of the texture. The jaw is articulated, and when opened, you can see the interior of the mouth has been done in a glossy, fleshy pink tone, and the roof of the mouth has also been addressed. The teeth are the usual stained, semi-translucent plastic that I love to see. Really gives the figure an extra layer of realism. I will say that the jaw on mine is a bit shoddy. I had to fight it to get it to open to begin with, and now it doesn't always want to stay open to its full extent. It tends to float to halfway closed. The same situation happened to my Retrosaurus, but I'll get into that in a later review. Luckily in both cases, I kinda prefer them with the mouth closed, and at least I don't have another Wilson situation on my hands. But yeah, I think REBOR did a great job on the head of this thing from all angles. I mean, look at that head, straight on, just perfectly captures that demonic appearance of the Carno that I fell in love with. It's not accurate by any means, but then again, the design never was, so. Moving on from the head, you can see that REBOR have captured that gnarly armored hide to a T with this figure. Just past the head, you can see the start of the sort of ridged armor adorned by rows of short, robust spikes and osteoderms. These forms have then been covered in compact scales of varying shapes and sizes, and what I love is that all of that detail is immediately perceivable without being overdone or enlarged just to show it off. I also love how they rendered that awesome looking tail with those spiky layers that put me in mind of desert lizards. That was always a design aspect I loved about Disney's creation. This is, of course, the same on both sides of the model, and I think it's safe to say that REBOR really hit a stride with this piece. A lot of their previous models, I feel, suffered from an overabundance of repetitive textures, and I get the instinct. You spend all that time sculpting a figure and you want it to look like it's got a lot of detail, but the level of exaggerated scales and how it just felt like a stamp that had been applied across the figure actually worked against the realism in my eyes. Here, it seems to have been greatly subdued, and that allows the wonderful work with the soft tissue to actually stand out rather than be buried in the texture. And speaking on that, I really love how REBOR handled the movement of the skin on this figure. First of all, the throat has all those lovely areas of folded, hanging skin around the gullet region. Then once you hit the midsection, you can see how the skin pulls away from the bracing leg and hangs down around the torso before coming up and wrapping around the shoulder blade. There's also some nice wrinkles on the opposite side, however they're a little less saggy, instead being pushed up against the torso by the left thigh. You can also get a good look at the folds of skin that are bunching up over the kneecap and joints of the leg. All of it really helps add a sense of mass to the figure. It's a hefty piece to begin with, but to have these areas where it appears gravity is working on the flesh of the animal and pulling it downward to buckle in on itself really sells it. I'm thoroughly impressed by it. Moving along the back of the figure, you can get a better look at the sectional armor and the parallel rows of spines. You can see that they sort of recede over the haunches before picking up again as we move down that gnarly looking tail. Then if we take a look at the underside, you can see another angle of the wrinkles on the throat, and as we transition to the midsection, you can see the figure sports a sort of crocodilian-esque underbelly with weathered rectangular scales adorning basically the entire surface area of the ventral region. Getting into the limbs of the figure, the arms are appropriately short but have indications of an elbow joint and plenty of musculature. You also have a row of spines along the elbows that make posing these arms a bit painful, but we'll get into that later. The hands are then tipped with 4 jet black little baby claws. The feet of the figure are quite robust, and I love the semi-curled appearance of the left foot there. The toe claws are once again picked out in a shining black color, and the backs of the toes have that usual plate scaling above the smaller reticula. But as you move up the legs, you can see that what this Carno lacks in arms, it more than makes up for with bulging calf muscles, and absolute thunder thighs that appear to be rippling with the movement of the figure. So yes, an absolutely stellar sculpt from REBOR on this one. I may be a little biased, but I personally hold this as one of the best overall sculpted figures released by the company to date. Not only does it nail the overall appearance of the source material, but it feels like REBOR really have improved their technique here, offering a piece that's still chock full of detail, but not overstated as if to compensate for something else. If I had to find one fault with the sculpt, it would be that the pose feels typical for REBOR's theropods, in that it's leaned forward and mid-stride. Not only has REBOR done poses very similar to this, with even more figures like it on the way, it feels a particularly poor choice here given how front-heavy this beast of a figure already is. You may have noticed I've had to prop mine up when I'm filming it at certain angles, and I've already done the hot water treatment twice on this thing. At best, I get him balanced precariously on his tiptoes when on a truly flat surface. Because of this, I do wish REBOR had explored some alternate posing options with this one. I get it, there's only so many standing poses you can do for your theropod, and to REBOR's credit, I do think I would enjoy this dynamic posture for the figure if they hadn't already done something similar to it. But when you look at companies like PNSO and see the variety of poses amongst their figures, it does make me wish REBOR would try something just a little different. As for the paint, well, the focal colors of reds and purples are pretty straightforward in their application, while the areas of cream appear to have been treated with darker brown dry brushing that works to both weather those areas of scale work and help them pop. I almost wish there was a bit more dimension to the paintwork on the rest of the body, but it captures the broad idea well enough that it's hard to fault. I mentioned it briefly, but like many of REBOR's products, you do have a couple of additional points of articulation, including the arms, which you can rotate forwards and backwards. The joints on mine are quite stiff, so moving them entails me really pushing on those spiky arms, which does actually hurt a little, but it's all worth it to get this figure in that why though pose, which you can do. The awesome tail is also a detachable piece composed of the typical softer plastic around a wire, which allows you to pose the tail in various positions. I've noticed paint cracks on some of my other REBOR bendy pieces, so in order to keep my Carnotaurus in as good a shape as possible, I substituted Epitaph's tail, which is the same mold. Hopefully this gives you an idea of the flexibility this tail allows for. The figure does come in two pieces, as is typical, but as usual, assembling it is a simple matter of wiggling and shoving the tail into place. Now for the size of this figure, and is it ever a beast? I think this might be the biggest REBOR theropod to date. You can see that this chonker comes in at around 16.5 inches long, or around 42 centimeters, and stands in at about 4 3/4 inches off the ground, or around 12 centimeters. The box advertises this figure as 1/35th scale, but that takes a little digging to confirm. The best source I could find indicated that Disney's Carnotaur, or at least one of them, was 15 feet tall, as stated on some DVD commentary. Now, if we take Iguanodon's height of just under 9 feet into consideration and compare that to some screen grabs, yeah, 15 feet seems reasonable. However, there are also plenty of promo images that feature an even bigger Carno, and one of them is clearly larger in the film, but for simplicity's sake, let's just stick with 15 feet tall. With this in mind, the Carnotaurus, representing the smaller on-screen animal, would be roughly 1/38 scale, so not even big enough to be 1/35, but close enough. Of course, for the larger specimen, you're looking at a much smaller scale, only about 1/55 if my numbers are correct. So I just like to think of this as the smaller specimen between the on-screen animals. That being said, if any of you superfans out there have any more accurate sizes for either Carno from the film, I am all ears. Now get ready for a ton of comparisons. I believe the scientific term would be a butt ton. The first obvious comparison I have to make is with REBOR's original take on Carnotaurus. So there is Requiem with the original Crimson King, and if you've seen my review of that figure, you know I have some problems with it. But here you can see that REBOR have both literally and metaphorically dwarfed their previous efforts. Requiem is absolutely massive compared to Crimson King. Not only that, but you can see how the sculpting style has changed so significantly throughout the time between these two releases. Crimson King definitely sports that uniform and exaggerated detail work, while Requiem's execution looks so much more lifelike in comparison. And that makes for a nice segue into our next slate of comparisons. We're going to be throwing some other Carnos onto the review space. You all knew this was coming. First up, here it is with Domingo, the most recent Carno on the market, at least to my knowledge. And oh my, does he look dainty next to Requiem here. Absolutely tiny and gracile in comparison. And that figure is right around that true 135 scale range for Carnotaurus. So yeah, if that gives you any idea how souped up the Carno and Dinosaur was, then there you go. Next up, here it is with the Collecta Carnotaurus, still one of the best representations of true Carnotaurus on the market if you ask me, but again, absolutely dwarfed by the REBOR figure there. And there you have the relatively recent take by Safari Ltd, a largely underrated figure in my eyes, but still not one of their better offerings. Then we have the Carnegie Carnotaurus, still my personal favorite Carnegie figure, scientific Carnotaurus figure, and one of my personal favorite figures in general. I always enjoy being able to pose figures of the real animal next to the film counterpart that first introduced me to the species. It makes for a sort of tribute to the past in more ways than one. For a final, more scientific comparison, here is Requiem next to the Batat sculpts, and it still amazes me that after all these years, those models still hold up relatively well as scientific representations of the animal. Plus, the devilish color scheme of the original actually predates Disney's design, proving that worm tones have always looked good on the meat-eating bull. But you know what hasn't held up all that well? The original Carnegie offering. Oh my goodness, that thing is just goofy. A compelling argument could be made that it is the goofiest figure in my entire collection, but God bless him, I can't help but love his stupid little face. And speaking of not so great figures, here's Requiem with the Schleich trio, the middle of which seems heavily inspired by Disney's take on the animal. I recall seeing some old reviews saying it was the closest you could get to a model of that Carnotaurus from Dinosaur, but boy oh boy, if only we knew what was in store. Next up, here is Requiem with the Papo Carnotaurus, the first dinosaur figure I got when I started collecting again. Yeah, it's official. I can blame everything on how much I loved that figure from Papo. Anyway, that was another piece obviously inspired by the Carnotaurus from Dinosaur, even though it lacked the iconic color scheme, but I think that's what drew me to it to begin with. That's why I chose it as my first figure, because it reminded me of the Carnotaurus Rex. Of course, I would go on to learn of its inaccuracies, but it still holds a very special place in my collection. As a final Carnotaurus model comparison, model being the operative word here, here it is with Nanmu's Carnotaurus Ranger, another piece inspired by film design, and I gotta say, I love that I live in a time where I can have a model of both the dinosaur from my childhood and the most recent screen adaptation of it from the modern day. It's also cool to see how different artists and filmmakers have gone about designing their own unique takes on the animal. Of course, if you ask me, Fallen Kingdom's design will never be nearly as iconic, even if it is more accurate. Getting tired of Carno comparisons yet? Well, quit getting antsy, we still got a few to make. First up, here is Requiem next to the massive old-school Mattel Carnotaurus toy from the Dinosaur toy line, and it simply tickles me pink that Mattel have come full circle from making one Carnotaurus toy to the next. Here's Carnage, the Action Attack Carnotaurus from the Mattel Fallen Kingdom toy line, aka still the best toy they've made so far. Again though, I'm so glad to have a toy of both the old and the new when it comes to dinosaurs of the screen. While I'm at it, let's go ahead and bring in the two Kenner Carnos, easily two of the ugliest takes on the species, but still oozing with their own unique charm. Plus, they're super rare, so yeah, they have got that going for them, haven't they? And now here it is with the Mattel Mini Carnos, which could almost play as hatchlings for the massive REBOR figure here, if you're so inclined. And I know I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel for Carno comparisons here, but here it is with Mattel's Snap Squad Carno, who looks kinda like an expectant baby of REBOR's model here. Alright, is that it for Carnotaurus models? We're good? Yeah? Alright, good. Now, for some REBOR comparisons. Gonna briefly show the Acrixonatosaurus there, and you can see, yes, these are the exact same mold, save for the removed horns. Obviously, the one I was most excited to get was the actual Carnotaurus. Even though it isn't a true Carno, it's still based on some semblance of the animal, a film design, so it feels a justified reason to make the model. Simply covering the horns and saying it's a Acrixonatosaurus when it clearly isn't, feels a little pointless and dirty to me. Still, it has its own unique draw and in some ways could be considered superior to the Carnotaurus. Plus, if you use your imagination, you could simply consider it as being an in-universe take on a Acrixonatosaurus from Disney's Dinosaur. Next, here it is with REBOR's Tyrannosaurus Rex Killer Queen, and believe it or not, Requiem actually outsizes that figure. I originally thought they'd be pretty close in size, but no, the Carnotaurus is longer, slightly taller, and much bulkier, not to mention much better sculpted and accurate to the film counterpart. And then here it is with REBOR's V-Rex Vanilla Ice, and whereas this one puts up a better fight in terms of the bulk, I still think Requiem is the largest of the three. I also think Vanilla's sculpt work was a step above Killer Queen's. At least the enlarged texture didn't feel as off with the crocodilian details of the V-Rex, but even so, I do think Requiem here stands head and shoulders above this figure in the sculpt department. And there they are, the big three all together, and this is a delight for me. Growing up, possibly the three greatest films that impacted my childhood would be Jurassic Park, Dinosaur, and Peter Jackson's King Kong, and to have figures of the amazing creatures from each on my desk is such a joy. There were other dinosaurs that influenced my childhood and teenage years, like Sharptooth from The Land Before Time and basically any of the Ray Harryhausen creations, but of course REBOR have also produced models inspired by those creations as well. Part of the reason the company has grown on me so much as of late. Now for the comparisons I'm sure everyone wants to see, but we're gonna save the big one for last. To start things off, here's Requiem with the Papostygimoloch in its jaws. I mean, if you know, you know. And here it is with a rather familiar looking Pachyrhinosaurus by Papo, and as you can see, it too just could not get away in time. Next up, here it is with the Papostyracosaurus, who looks a little put off by Requiem's mouthful of teeth and bad attitude. And then, of course, here's the W-Dragon Giraffatitan, and I don't even think that figure's massive size is enough to protect it from this ravenous Carnotaur. Alright, enough playing around. Here's what you all want to see. It's the Carnotaurus Rex with the Papo-Iguanodon. And I can just hear James Newton Howard's incredible score swelling in my mind when I look at this. You know, the dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Yeah, like that. Oh my gosh. Papo's Iguanodon might be a little too big for it to work perfectly, but this is tickling my nostalgia bone so hard that I don't even care. If you have the Papo Iguanodon, then get this Carnotaurus, because being able to do this alone makes it more than worth the price. Phew. And after all those comparisons, the time has come to wrap up this review of REBOR's new Carnotaurus Rex, Crimson King Requiem. This figure truly was worth the wait and is easily among the best REBOR has to offer in my eyes. Off the top of my head, I don't know that I could name another figure from them currently available that looks this nice in its overall presentation. If you're a fan of Dinosaur or Carnotaurus in general, then this figure is absolutely mandatory to get. Easily Dynamite with 2 roaring seals of approval and potentially my favorite model released in the year of 2021. As always, I want to know what you guys think of this figure. Do you own it yet? Are you planning to pick it up? And are you as big a fan of Disney's Dinosaur as I am? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments section below. And a huge thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Killershrewfan Spooktacular Toy Reviews. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again real soon for the next one. Until then, take care out there, and goodbye.